Thank you, Peter, for coming on and joining me on the podcast today. It's great to have you, and I appreciate you taking the time. You are the founder and executive chairman of the XPRIZE Foundation, which has run over $250 million worth of competitions. You're also the executive founder of Singularity University. You started over 25 companies in health tech, space, venture capital, and education. You're the vice chairman and co-founder of a couple of public companies, Cellularity and Vaccinity. The laundry list goes on and on. Currently, you're working on Fountain Life, co-founder of Bold Capital Partners, incredibly active. And in addition to all of that, you've written 4 best-selling books: Abundance, Bold, The Future is Faster Than You Think, and most recently, Life Force. So it's great to be able to talk with you. I think you're one of the most optimistic people in the world when it comes to painting a positive picture of the future. So I've been a fan for a long time. I'd
Thanks,
like to
Jake.
start. Yeah, no problem. I'd like to start in sort of a unique time in your life. You went to some great schools and studied some difficult courses. One of those times you were in med school at Harvard, and you were watching, I think this was in the 80s, I guess. You're watching a documentary on some of the longest living sea animals in the world, and you realized, sharks live a few hundred years, and you asked yourself, why can't humans live that long? How did that, or maybe things before that, lead to this interest that you've sort of maintained to this day and seem to be accelerating, which is your involvement in longevity and how can humans live longer, healthier lives?
Yeah, the television show, it was a documentary, and it showed like one species of whales, bowhead whales, could live 200 years, and Greenland sharks could live 400 or 500 years and have babies when they're 200 years old. And I was like, okay, if they can live that long, why can't we? And it was then that I kind of realized it's either a hardware problem or a software problem, and we're going to learn how to address those problems. And the idea that we are limited to some particular uh, life expectancy is something I sort of rebel against. And the evidence, I think we're beginning to truly understand why we age, how to slow it, stop it. And there's a lot of conversation and research around reversing it now. If you think about the fact that when you're born, you get 3.2 billion letters from your mother and from your father, and that same software, that same DNA is the same at birth, at 20, at 50, at 80, at 100. So if you got the same code, why do you look different? And it isn't the genes you have, it's which genes are on and which genes are off. It's the epigenome, for the Greek word epi for above. And so what we're beginning to understand is how do you control that epigenome, and perhaps how do you reverse it to an earlier stage of life when you had a 6-pack and were in better health and had no inflammation, et cetera. So there's a lot of work going on right now. It's my first 20, 30 years of my life were really focused on opening up the space frontier, which is a very optimistic vision of humanity's future, sort of Star Trek, if you would. And the last decade has really been committed to how do we get to that future? How do we extend our healthy lifespans 20, 30 years? And then with that extra few decades, how do you intercept the next bridge to live even longer and healthier lives?
Yeah, it's interesting. You've had this sort of parallel interest in longevity or healthcare at large and space going back to your college days. I think when you graduated, you went and started your MD at Harvard, and then I think dropped out for a little bit to go back to MIT and get a graduate degree in aerospace engineering. And then you went back and finished the MD at Harvard. So you've sort of been navigating between space and something along the lines of longevity for quite a long time. I'm curious, spending the first few decades of your career very focused on space. What was the nature of the transition to really, over this last decade, like you mentioned, double down on longevity? It seems like space was sort of unbelievably early when you were first into it. There wasn't SpaceX. There wasn't a whole lot of progress since, the time when you were a kid. And now it's sort of seems to be picking up steam, whereas longevity now feels like super far away still to a lot of people. It's like we're talking about it, but, it seems like it's decades away, not years away. Was that part of your
Yeah,
transition, just that it's like so far in front and those are the things you like to work on?
I guess I guess I like challenges. But yeah, I mean, when I got involved in space, and I was born in the 60s, and it was the Apollo program. I got to experience the tail end of the Apollo program, and then Star Trek, which I call that optimistic documentary about the future. Those two really inspired me. And I wanted to become an astronaut, went to medical school, make my parents happy. I actually finished medical school to make my parents happy, and then did the aerospace stuff as a gift for myself. And I pursued space and started a bunch of companies there, a university, International Space University. And then it was the XPRIZE that I launched in 1996 that was won in 2004 that really kicked off private spaceflight. And I got to know Bezos early on through one of my first organizations called Students for the Exploration and Development of Space, SEDS, and then met Elon in 2000 when he had just sold PayPal to eBay, or 2001. And, push space as hard as I could. I think having the XPRIZE get won really was a culmination there. Jeff and Elon came to space with billions of dollars in their pocket, so to speak, and have done an extraordinary job. And I think that I could check that box, that I had done what I could to move that whole vision of space forward. But I realized it was not going anywhere near as fast as I wanted it to. I thought we would be on the moon permanently by now. We would be on Mars by now. We'd be mining asteroids by now. And it's not that we can't, it's that the capital investments and the tech haven't been really moved forward. We could do those things, and we will do those things, but the timeline is decades to the right. And so, two things or three things occurred that moved me into the longevity field. The one was the realization that if I really wanted to see this future in space that I've been dreaming about, I'm going to need extra time on this planet. I need an extra 30, 40, 50 years. The second thing was, hey, I'm getting older and I want to be in my best shape, and I want to be able to um, experience all these things myself, not through the eyes of someone else. And then finally, the realization was I'm an entrepreneur. I've built now 26 companies. Some have been great successes. Some have been abject failures, a lot, on their way, hopefully up and to the right. But longevity was truly one of the biggest business opportunities on the planet. And so I started getting involved in building companies in the biotech and health tech space. And it's been a blast, and I love it. And I think, health is your greatest wealth. So, so those are the forces that have led me there. I'll go back and play in space again, but I'll do it with a couple of $100 million of disposable income, because that's what it takes to do anything right now in the space business.
Yeah, you can do that with $100-something million disposable income, and maybe age 100 and something as well, and you'll be in peak physical fitness and doing everything you want to do.
That's the goal. That's the goal.
So I think it actually takes a tremendous amount of courage to to believe in a lot of these things that you believed in over the years in space, while maybe not happening as quickly as one would like. There's certainly been, I think it would be hard to argue that there hasn't been a ton of progress in the last 10, 20 years, largely thanks to people like yourself and to Elon and Jeff and some others. And, the reason it takes courage is because these things can easily not pan out. And when you sort of start believing in them, which I think is like a prerequisite to making them happen, they're out of the money bets, they're not, most people don't think they're going to happen for a reason. I think you have this saying that everything is sort of like a crazy idea until it's, a breakthrough. I butchered that a little bit, but some quote
it's
like
okay.
that.
It's close. I say the day before something is truly a breakthrough, it's a crazy idea.
Exactly.
If it wasn't a crazy idea, it wouldn't be a breakthrough. It'd be an expected incremental progression. But a real breakthrough is previously thought of as crazy.
Right. And so I think, longevity is like the most extreme example of this, because it's actually like your own life or the lives of, loved ones and things like that, where you actually, in order to sort of motivate oneself to work on stuff like this, at least with the idea that, you can influence your own longevity and health span, you sort of have to convince yourself that there's, a reasonable enough probability that it's worth working on. And I'm curious, I'm a bit younger than you. Like my parents are roughly your age, and I think about this a lot. Like for people, in their 50s, 60s, even 70s, when you hear people like, George Church or Kurzweil who are talking about we're a decade away, we're 2 decades away, you're sort of like right on the cutting edge. And for, for someone like me, it's like, well, I can let this play out for 10 or 20 years and sort of see how the progress goes and worry about that a little bit later and try to be healthy in the interim. But how have you sort of summoned the courage to say, screw it, I'm going to work on this longevity stuff and try to get, try to preserve my health in sort of more natural cutting edge ways as long as I can to get to that point of, longevity escape velocity?
Great questions, Jake. And yeah, I think I flip the question and say, how could someone not want to do that? So I'm 62 right now, and I feel physically and from a medical biometric standpoint, I'm in the healthiest I've ever been. And my objective is to keep that as long as I possibly can. I don't need to live 30 or 40 years at peak. I need to live long enough at peak to intercept the breakthroughs coming in the next 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, which will then extend life that much longer and give me access to the next generation of breakthroughs. And you mentioned the idea of longevity escape velocity. Aubrey de Grey and Ray Kurzweil have sort of coined that concept, and it's the idea that today, for every year that we're alive, we're adding somewhere between a quarter to a third of a year to lifespan, driven by science and medical breakthroughs. And there's going to be a point that at some point in the near future, for every year that you're alive, science during that year has added an additional year to your lifespan and maybe a little bit more. And that departs and becomes, sort of, living long enough to live forever. Now, I'm not talking about immortality here, but I am interested in adding, breaking through anyone's preconceived notions of 100 years old. I was on stage recently. I run a longevity platinum trip every year. I pulled together, 40 venture capitalists, family offices, philanthropists, and we meet the top AI, biotech, health tech scientists in the world. 1 year on the East Coast, 1 year on the West Coast. And this year we've been on the East Coast with David Sinclair and George Church. And I asked them the question, is there a limit to human lifespan? We've only seen people living to 120, 121, 122 at max. Is there a hard limit? And the answer repeatedly is no, there is not. That we are going to gather the tech and the capability, the knowledge, the science to go and blow through that and extend for a longer span. So that's what I work towards. What wouldn't someone give for an extra 10, 20, 30 healthy years? Now, I've changed my mindset, my sleeping, my diet, my exercise, my annual diagnostics and therapeutics, my meds, my supplements to maximize getting there. And at the end of the day, I think it's worth it. I feel I have more energy than I've ever had. So I think there's no downside other than, giving up sweet desserts and sugar for breakfast.
Yeah, I think it's a great point that not only, I mean, on the one hand, maybe you have to make a few sacrifices, desserts, things like that, like you mentioned, but it's not like you're just doing all of this and trying to be as healthy as you can and get to that point that you sort of need to get to in peak or close to peak physical fitness and health, just to get there. But if you don't get there, like it's all for naught. Rather, you get to enjoy the ride a lot more, being healthier and feeling a lot better and having high energy and things like that. So that's on the personal side. And then on working on, radical longevity and co-founding some of these companies you co-founded and helping fund them and things like that. that's where I think you really sort of need to have this conviction that, hey, on the work front, I'm actually not wasting my time here. This is sort of the most noble mission I can go after. And, basically the biggest mission on earth, if you ask me, and maybe you as well agree. So it's sort of a no-brainer on that front. But I think what's surprising to see, or at least took me a while to like wrap my head around, is a lot of people, there's this term, I'm not sure if you're familiar, called the pro-aging trance. I think Aubrey de Grey came up with that one as well, where basically these, everyone has sort of convinced themselves for whatever reason that like death is good, because for all of human history, it's been, inevitable, right?
Inevitable, yeah, of course.
Yeah. And so it sort of makes sense. It's like if you have no chance to avoid this thing, you sort of tell yourself whatever stories you need to tell yourself to get comfortable with it. But now we're at this point where, hey, maybe, we're not talking about immortality or whatever, but maybe you don't have to die when you're 100. Maybe you don't even have to die when you're 120. Maybe we can get to 150 and beyond. And the only way to do that is to convince enough people that it's possible to work towards it and to fund it and everything like this. So what are some of the biggest concerns that you've encountered with people who are sort of, despite sort of the logic of it, they're just not on board with even trying to live longer, healthier lives? And how do you sort of confront some of those critiques that you hear?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the very first critique is uh, I want to enjoy my life, and the idea of cutting out, the carbs and the sugar and such. Sugar is a pro-inflammatory. It glycosylates proteins. It attaches itself covalently to hemoglobin and other proteins, and it causes you problems. Or I don't, I'd rather watch Netflix and hang on the couch than go to the gym. It takes some level of effort. And one of the challenges is when you're younger and you've got the energy, that's fine. But as you grow older, if you have aches and pains and your energy level is lower, the ability to invest it um, in in working out, in having the willpower to resist that dessert and so forth. So it's a slippery slope. If you start getting out of shape, then it becomes harder to get back into shape. So really maintaining, being in shape and having the energy and the willpower is an important sort of prerequisite. And you can get back there. And I've fallen sort of off the wagon, if you would, and then said, nope, back on. And it takes amount, like right now, there's a group of individuals who are part of my Abundance 360 and Abundance Platinum community who are doing a 22-day no sugar fast altogether. There's a wonderful Dr. Guillermo Navarrete out of Miami, who's a member of my community. He runs these 22-day no sugar fasts, and so everybody gets in a WhatsApp group together and basically have a ketogenic diet for 22 days, minimizing any kind of high glycemic foods and sugars and eating really cleanly together. And you lose that addiction after 22 days, and you prove to yourself that you can in fact do that. A lot of it's willpower in that regard. So anyway, that's how I think about it.
Yeah, so that makes sense on some of the day-to-day stuff, but on the concept of what if we can make people, as human populations, live substantially
Right.
longer?
So people worry about overpopulation, right?
Yeah.
Oh my God, are we, we're going to drain the worth of resources. We're going to overpopulate. We already have too many people on the planet Earth. And, I write about this. I'm writing about this in my next book, which is the follow-on to my first abundance book. It's called Scaling Abundance. And listen, the data is very clear that we are heading towards a massive underpopulation of the planet. 50 years ago, their average number of children per family globally was 5.05. The replacement level is 2.1, to maintain population on Earth. And we've gone from 5.05 50 years ago to down to about like 2.3 today. The US is below the replacement level, as is a lot of parts of Europe, most of Asia. The only continent that's above the replacement level is Africa. And as we make Africa better educated and healthier, it will start to drop down too. So we need people to live longer. We need people to be productive in society to maintain our standards of living. Otherwise, we have a whole new set of problems.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think the overpopulation thing, especially with, Elon's been a big proponent of this underpopulation concern for the last couple of years at least. It's gotten a lot more attention, and I think there's a lot less concern around the overpopulation thing. But even Elon himself doesn't seem to be like totally on board with extending human health span. And I think this
Mm.
comes back to that pro-aging trance where it's like, obviously Elon's like infinitely times smarter than I am. So maybe he just knows something that I don't know. But I think part of sort of what might be impacting his perspective is that there's this idea that, that older people need to die in order to bring, new ideas into the world. There's that old quote about like, science moves one, dead scientist at a time or
Yeah.
whatever it is. And Steve Jobs has the quote about, death being life's change agent. But I don't know that that's necessarily true. Can't we, figure out how to live a lot longer and healthier and then figure out how to sort of push ideas further?
You know, I've had this argument with him, and I completely disagree with him. I mean, listen, he, the heads of McDonnell Douglas and Boeing and Lockheed didn't have to die for Elon to create SpaceX. He just created a better product, right? You didn't have to have the CEOs of all the car companies pass away for him to create Tesla. He just created a better product. I think at the end of the day, we're going to see meritocracy in terms of, is your product and what you're doing better? Um, and if it is, it's going to survive. And, Elon's 10 years younger than I am. And when he's in his early 60s, I'll have this conversation with him again. I guarantee you, he'll be looking forward to enjoying all the pro longevity extending technologies himself.
Yeah, well, I think the good news is there are lots of very wealthy and prominent people who are paying huge attention, and the list goes on. But Bezos invested in Altos, and you've got New Limit, which Brian Armstrong co-founded. A couple other companies that have been around for a bit longer, starting to get lots more investment. Are you seeing? I guess how would you compare? You were very much at the center of the space industry's sort of progression over the last few decades. How do you feel we're doing on the longevity front in terms of funding, teams working on it, things like that?
Yeah, I think we're doing amazing. Personally, I've seen a huge amount of capital. I'm tracking this very carefully. We're getting ready for an XPRIZE before the end of the year in this field of health span extension. I can't say much about it right now, but um, what we have as well is a huge amount of wealth that has a personal stake in living longer. So you can't take it with you. It's like, come on, what are you gonna do with your billions? Give it to your kids to ruin their lives? Or do you want to help extend your health and everybody else's health? The other thing is we've got three new buckets of tools coming our way. One is AI is having a massive impact in our understanding. The second is, of course, all of the biotech technologies from gene editing, gene writing and reading, and therapeutics, cellular medicine. And then we've got coming in the next few years a whole set of tech around quantum technologies, quantum chemistry, and of course the body is a quantum system. So all these things converging are giving us a brand new set of tools to understand why and how we age, how to slow it, stop it, and reverse it. So, um, you know, when I run my longevity platinum trips, I ask people um, in during the program to like, where is your confidence level of getting to, past 120? And as they hear these scientists who are just brilliantly talking about all of the breakthroughs and the science they're doing and the experiments they're doing and what they're doing, we see the number, their confidence level going up. And a lot of the work I do is really around mindsets. I think your mindset as an entrepreneur is like the most important thing you have. And there's a longevity mindset. If you have a pro longevity mindset, and you believe that this tech is likely to be able to extend your life if you're there to intercept it, if you truly believe that and you work towards it, then you've got a better shot. If you don't believe and you're not working towards it, you diminish your chances. So where's your longevity mindset? And then in my other parts of my life, it's where's your abundance mindset, your moonshot mindset, your exponential mindset, etc.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk a bit more about this sort of mindset development. It seems to be a large part of your focus, and I think it is just sort of like upstream of everything else, going back to when you wrote the book on abundance, several years ago. That sort of implanted this abundance mindset maybe in a lot more people in the world who previously had more of a scarcity mindset, and drove them from
Yeah,
fear to optimism. And everyone can sort of develop their own version of what a positive mindset looks like that's custom to their life. But generally, moving from scarcity to abundance and fear to optimism seem like sort of great trends to go on. But you mentioned the XPRIZE, and can't wait to see the details of that longevity or health span related XPRIZE coming up this year. But this is something you've been doing for over a couple of decades now. And I think when you first started it, what was crazy to me was like you didn't even have the money lined up for the first prize, and you didn't have any teams who were working on it. And of course, it was related to space, which had been your passion, for already a decade plus at that time, and then a decade plus thereafter. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what inspired you to start the XPRIZE in the first place? Of course, there have been several since then,
yeah,
and
sure.
just how this prize exactly, it's like still somewhat of an uncommon incentivization method that, there's VC and things like this, but prizes are still fairly uncommon, and you're sort of like the most prominent person doing them. So what makes them great as sort of an incentivization structure?
Sure, happily. So to set the setting, I just graduated medical school, right? I'd done a master's at MIT in aerospace. My fourth year of medical school, I am running two companies, a satellite launch company, building a rocket called the Orbex, which we ended up selling the company to CTA and then Orbital Sciences, and then running a university called the International Space University, which is headquartered in Strasbourg, France. And the more I'm diving into space, the more I realize that it isn't happening. It's just slow. The space shuttle is never going to get us there. And all of the dreams of space entrepreneurs are just mañana, mañana. And it's like the biggest bottleneck is how do we get ourselves into space at lower and lower prices? What's the marketplace that's going to drive us there? Um, I am given a book by a dear friend, Greg Marinak, which was The Spirit of St. Louis that Lindbergh wrote as his autobiography. And as I'm reading Lindbergh's autobiography, I learned that in 1927, Charles Lindbergh crosses the Atlantic not on a whim, but to win a $25,000 prize. And I start researching prizes, and I'm like, wow, these early aviation prizes for crossing the English Channel and going from, New York to Le Bourget, which was called the Ortigue Prize, going from London to Australia. All these prizes were just they were funded by a lot of the newspapers back then to create media stories and hero stories, and they worked. They worked amazingly well. And so by the time I had finished reading The Spirit of St. Louis, I conceived of the idea of creating a prize for private spaceflight. I said, I want to create a prize that's going to spark entrepreneurs to build private spaceships that could take me and my friends up into space. And because I didn't know who was going to be my Pulitzer, my Ortigue, my Nobel to fund the prize, I called it the X Prize. The X was a variable to be replaced by the name of the funder. And I said, it's going to be a $10 million prize because I'd been in the space business. I understood that 10 million was probably enough to build a private spaceship that could carry three adults up 100 kilometers, land, and do it again within 2 weeks. It was going to be a simple set of rules. So that was the idea. announced the prize under the arch in St. Louis without having any prize money, without having any teams. But I was able to get the head of NASA and the head of the FAA to be there for the announcement, to have 20 astronauts on stage, to be part of the announcement. And we ended up, it took me about 5 or 6 years to find the money. Finally, from an amazing woman, Anusha Ansari, who's now the CEO of the XPRIZE. She had just sold her company for 1.3 billion, and she funded that prize. She then went on to the space station to fly private to the space station. So that prize got won in 2004 by Burt Rutan, funded by Paul Allen, and then Richard Branson bought the rights to create Virgin Galactic. And since then, we've launched a little over now $300 million in prizes. We're about to launch another $250 million in prizes before the end of the year. And it's been an amazing incentive. And what we say to people is, I don't care where you went to school, what you've ever done, where you live, if you can build and demonstrate the technology to solve this very clearly articulated problem, you win the money and the world wins the benefits. So that's the prize model. It doesn't stipulate how, it stipulates what you need to do. So we've had prizes for mapping the ocean floor, pulling water out of the atmosphere. I got Elon to fund a $100 million gigaton carbon removal prize. We had 1,200 teams enter that competition. And we create a giant marketplace, and we give entrepreneurs a target to shoot for, and we level the playing field where pure startups and massive companies can compete head to head, and it's meritocracy. Whoever's got the best idea wins the money.
Right. Yeah, no, I think it's an awesome structure, and hopefully, it sounds like momentum's even picking up from 300 million that you've done to date and $250 million new in the pipeline. So that's awesome. Yeah. I'm curious, there's obviously the winners of these prizes, the few that have been won, and of course there's many in progress as well. But there's also a laundry list of super ambitious, hardworking people who end up not winning the prizes, but putting in a lot of effort and some capital and things like this. Obviously, the winner is a huge success and things like this, but the losers as well are sort of, to your point, you're like creating this marketplace where there's lots of people taking shots on goal, and these projects, just because they don't win the prize, they don't necessarily stop doing what they're doing. They can go raise capital and things like this. How do you
Absolutely
see these sort of ecosystems that you're creating develop beyond just the winner?
Yeah, I mean, one of the most important things we do is we create a marketplace. We credential that there's a need for this and that it is possible. I'll give you my favorite example of what's coming. So I live in California. I have relatives in Greece, and all we hear about is wildfires all over the place. And it was about 5 years ago, we're being evacuated from our home. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is ridiculous that that no one's stopping these fires before they become these conflagrations. And I had friends of mine up in Malibu who couldn't get insurance for their property because they had been burned down in a fire. And so I started off on a journey to try and create an XPRIZE for wildfire detection and prevention. I got an amazing fellow, Dick Merkin, to put up the seed capital. And it took us 5 years to raise the prize money. Pacific Gas and Electric, Lockheed, the Minderoo Foundation, the Hilton Foundation, and the Gordon Moore Foundation funded an $11 million prize. And it's asking teams, can you build the tech to monitor 1,000 square acres? If you detect a wildfire at ignition, if it's 2 meters or larger, or if it's moving, put it out in 10 minutes before it spreads, right? And you can imagine once that's done, the marketplace it's going to create is a true fire insurance. Instead of paying someone after their house burns down, the insurance prevents the fire from starting in the first place, right? So that's a huge market potential that I hope will transform wildfires so we prevent them in the first place.
Yeah, I think that's great. And it sort of reminds me of actually like the approach on healthcare as well, a preventative approach to putting out fires
Yeah,
rather than just trying to fix the problem once it's done. Um,
absolutely.
I do want to touch on mindsets, which, we alluded to a little bit earlier, and specifically what you do and what you have done or recommend to others in terms of training that positive mindset and surrounding yourself with people who sort of improve your mindset and development and sort of curating and managing your information diet. I'm curious, like, what do you read? What do you listen to? How do you think about what gets in, what doesn't get in, who you surround yourself with, all things like this?
Yeah, so let me frame it for those listening. If I were to say to you, what do you think makes the greatest leaders on the planet successful? Is it their money? Is it their tech? Is it their friends? Or is it their mindset, right? Whether it's Elon or Mahatma Gandhi or Martin Luther King or Jeff Bezos, whoever you want to point at, the vast majority of people would say it's their mindset that makes them successful. Take away everything from these individuals, but leave them their mindset, and they'd regain much of their success. And so, if mindset is really the most important thing for you as a leader, then my next question is, what mindset do you have? Where did you get it? And more importantly, what mindset do you need for the decade ahead? So I started thinking a lot about this. And uh, the next frame we're thinking about is, we've been hearing a lot recently in the AI world about neural nets and training neural nets, right? So a neural net is a modeled on the human brain. It's a series of sort of like digital neurons that are layered, and you train a visual neural net to see cats by showing it images of cats after cats after cats after cats, and it begins to realize that a cat has four legs, a tail, pointy ears, etc. And that's how you train it. And you train a kid or a dog in the same way, repetitive examples. So our brains are neural nets, and we train them by, as you said, who we hang out with, the conversations we have, what we watch, what's on our walls, what we read, what we listen to. All of those things are constantly training your neural net. And so I guard my mindset in the same way that I guard my diet, right? I don't eat sugar. I don't eat high glycemic carbs. And I don't drink, cow's milk. There are certain things I don't do, and then there's certain things that I do. I try and bring in, whole plants. I try and get enough protein through the day and drink enough water and all of those things that are pro my, ingestion. And also for myself, I don't watch the Crisis News Network, which is my joke for CNN. I don't have a decent one for Fox. You couldn't pay me enough to have the news media feed me what they want to feed me. I mean, their job is to deliver your eyeballs to their advertisers, and they feed us 10 times more negative news than positive news because our ancient piece, uh, parts of our brain, our amygdala, are triggered by negative news, and we remain glued. But the TV sets, but do you really need to see every murder on the planet in living color over and over and over again every 10 minutes? And it's not that the news is at this point fake news. It's just not a fair and balanced view of what's going on in the world. You don't hear about all of the medical breakthroughs and the scientific breakthroughs and the companies that got funded. All you hear is about the disasters and the bankruptcies and the politicians. And I just don't need that. You know, I'm, it's not that I remain disconnected. I've set up my own news alerts for things that are relevant to me. And I'll spend probably, 30 seconds looking at news headlines, but not more than that. I don't need to know more than that. So I am very careful about what I let in. And I'm constantly focused on, because I teach this, I write about this, I put out 2 blogs a week to my community, one on the latest breakthroughs on longevity and one on what's going on uh, mindsets or exponential technologies. And so as I write and read and teach and interact, I'm constantly honing those mindsets. And again, the mindsets I care about, the curiosity mindset, a gratitude mindset, an abundance mindset, an exponential mindset, a longevity mindset, and an abundance mindset. And so, I'm sorry, and a moonshot mindset. And those are what I focus on.
Yeah, and you know, you didn't mention it as an explicit mindset, but I think it sort of is implicit across all of them, which is sort of an optimistic mindset. And I think it's very interesting. You know, you call yourself a data-driven optimist, which I actually hadn't heard that exact term before, but it's a great one. And you describe how it's sort of enabled by evidence of abundance all around us, and this is the best time ever to be alive. When you hear people who are like, "Oh man, you know, COVID and and you know the political unrest and all this, all these problems that people point to, the type of stuff that CNN and Fox just sort of pound into your brain day in and day out, like you were saying. What are the first things you sort of point to in terms of evidence of abundance, where you try to, you know, get someone to take just like a little bit of a more positive view on the world, that this is actually a great time to be alive?
Where I'll take them is, uh, we tend to romanticize the past. Oh, in the good old days. I call bullshit. In good old days when life was short and brutish, you'd work 70-hour weeks to survive and you were dead by 50. Those were the good old days, right? 100 years ago, I'll say, listen, would you rather live in the year 1900 or the year or today? Let's begin with that. And if people choose 1900, it's just they don't have the facts, right? In New York alone, there were, um, New York stank from horse manure and urine on the streets every day, and there was pestilence. Between 1900 and today, there were 240 million deaths due to pestilence and hunger and war. But by almost all standards of living have gone up and to the right. And if we sit down and we look at it, um, you know, 100 years ago, 45% of kids born globally died before the age of 5, right? That number has dropped down to about 4%, still too low. We've seen access to food, water, energy, healthcare, education explode onto the planet. And at the end of the day, these devices are cell phones. You can have $40 cell phones on the planet, which give any individual now. There are no more cell phones than there are humans, and something like 93% of humans on the planet have access to this. It's your education, it's your entertainment, it's your access to global knowledge, your access to communications, your access even to free artificial intelligence. And so we have a chance to truly uplift every human on the planet. And the challenge is the hard wiring of our brain is around scarcity and fear, like you said, and we default to that, and we compare ourselves against the Kardashians or whomever it might be, and fail to realize the extraordinary world that we're living in. We're living in a miraculous world. To quote Sadhguru, who I was on stage with, and said something I'll never forget. And he said, technology allows humanity to take a vacation from survival. Most of human history was fundamentally about surviving. And that is, it's still the case in some parts of the world, but in the vast majority, it's not.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. That's a great quote. I hadn't heard it before, but I think that may be obviously sort of survival has become decreasingly necessary to focus on for humans over the course of history, but never less so than today. And I think, you see this sort of crisis of purpose, I'll call it, where lots of people, especially sort of younger generations today, feel this lack of meaning and lack of purpose. They want to know, what's the meaning of life? What's it all about? Asking these sort of like existential questions. And it transitions nicely to another thing that you talk a lot about, which is this massive transformative purpose, or
Yes.
MTP. And I was sort of, I knew you from all of the futurist and technology type stuff, but I had no idea about this until preparing for the podcast. And it resonated a lot with me. A few years ago, basically, I just sort of, from another, person I respected who was sort of talking about the importance of defining your purpose, just sort of convinced me. It's like, okay, you know what? Even if I don't believe I have like one purpose or I don't know like what the value of this activity is or whatever, I'm just going to try it and just give my best to define what is my purpose. Let's say I have one, and it can change over time and things like that. And so I did that, and it was tremendously helpful as just sort of thinking about sort of the core of who I am and what I like to do, and serving as sort of a filter for what to do thereon.
Yeah,
So this is something you obviously advocate
like
for quite a bit. How do you sort of drive people
deeply,
to find their purpose?
deeply. So, it's probably the seventh mindset and probably the first one I should have mentioned, which is having a purpose-driven mindset. And I talk about having an MTP, a massive transformative purpose. And you can shift your purpose over life. You don't have to pick one that you're going to stick with the rest of your life. Early on, when I sort of became conscious of the idea of wanting, enjoying having a purpose, it really was in my uh, early 20s, late teens, college to grad school, was making humanity multiplanetary species. It was opening up the private space frontier. It drove me. Um, it transitioned there to around the XPRIZE and singularity around uh, addressing and solving the world's grand challenges. And then the third, and where I am right now, is serving entrepreneurs. And my MTP is to inspire and guide entrepreneurs to create a hopeful, compelling, and abundant future for humanity. So that drives me in a lot of what I do. And when I'm teaching this, what I talk about is the notion that you need to be clear in your purpose who you want to support. For me, it's entrepreneurs, right? It's like my mission is to support entrepreneurs. And how do you want to support them? What are the verbs you want to use? For me, it's inspiring and guiding them. I do that through my books. I do that through Singularity. I do that through XPRIZE, inspiring them towards a goal, guiding them towards those goals. And then what is it you want? And for me, I'm driven by trying to create a world which is hopeful, compelling, and abundant. And when you have a clear MTP, and it should be something that you can memorize and you can convey to anybody in a short conversation. They know who you are. And then magic happens. Things become extraordinary, where if you're clear about um, your MTP and you share it with me, and I know that some friends over here, you should meet them, all of a sudden the world starts coming to you. So getting your MTP is important. Being able to share it publicly and proudly is important. Um, when you have your MTP, it's sort of one of the most important things it does in this world of incredible abundance, where there's more and more and more opportunities coming at you. Your massive transformative purpose helps you decide what you should and should not do. If you're taking everything coming at you, you're not focused, right? A friend, Martine Rothblatt, had a great quote. She said, the successful individual says no to most things. The most successful individual says no to everything, or almost everything, whatever it would be. So how do you focus what you're doing on? Well, your MTP helps you focus. The other thing is your massive transformative purpose. I think of it as a canvas upon which you paint your moonshot. So once you know your MTP, whatever it might be, your moonshots are then places where you're trying to go 10 times bigger than anybody else, right? So when my early MTP was around opening up space flight, the Ansari X Prize was one of my moonshots there. Creating my company, Zero Gravity Corporation, was a moonshot on that. For those interested, and I highly recommend it, going through this exercise, I actually built an AI um, that helps people design their MTP and their moonshots for free. If you go to moonshotplanner.com, just that's it, just moonshotplanner.com, you can uh, register, and the AI will take you through the process of defining your MTP and step by step by step. And then once you've defined your MTP, defining a moonshot. I think every entrepreneur should have a clear MTP and a moonshot. It can be true for a company to have an MTP, or a family, or a philanthropy, or a country to have an MTP and a moonshot as well.
Yeah, it sounds awesome, and definitely encourage people to go check that out. It's been, some version of this has been very important and impactful for me, and I think sounds like a much better structured and much more thoughtful and intentional way to go about it, with the help of AI as sort of goes everything these days, and it's very helpful in a lot of ways. But I want to close on something. Your recent book that you co-authored, Exponential Organizations, talks about how sort of organizations of the now are different from organizations of the past. They can make things 10 times better, faster, cheaper. And it's sort of, it flies in the face a little bit of like this, the purpose and the focus, and contrasting that with how much you're able to do between all the companies that you work on and the books that you write and things like this. And of course, they're all hyper related and focused within, basically that purpose that you talked about. But how do you manage to get so much done and to have your hand in the creation of so many companies? And I'm curious, maybe there's sort of some elements from the organizations in that book that you spoke about that you've been able to use over the last couple of decades, since this has sort of become a phenomenon, in order to just be so tremendously, impactful and productive?
Well, let's see. I am able to do what I'm doing by virtue of a couple of things. Number one, I'm very much passion and purpose driven. It's the only way to get stuff done. It's an emotional driver, right? When you find your MTP, one of the things is to realize that your massive transformative purpose is fueled by emotional energy. It's fueled either by positive emotional energy, like awe and excitement and desire to see something happen, or a negative emotional energy, like I refuse to let this happen to anybody else. I'm going to solve and slay this issue. And sometimes both, right? I have a developing MTP around health and longevity, and it's really that positive energy of desiring to add decades of healthy life. It's also this energy of like, the healthcare system sucks, and I'm going to slay it and destroy it and put it out of its misery, out of our misery, right? Reinvent that. So that emotional energy has got to be at the core of anything you do. If it isn't, then it's going to be work and it isn't going to succeed. And if you've got that emotional energy, when I come to from project A to B to C, it's a renewal of that energy. But the other thing that's most important is I know what I'm good at, and I'm great at coming up with the idea, pulling together the founding team, capitalizing it, or raising the capital for it, and then I hire a CEO to run that. So I'm not the CEO of multiple companies. At most, I've ever been the CEO of two, and I try and make it one. And either take a role as chairman or executive chairman or vice chairman of those companies across the board in the things that I do. But Anusha Ansari is running, the XPRIZE Foundation, and Julie Van Amerongen is running my Abundance 360, and Bill Kapp is CEO of Fountain Life, right? And those are individuals who my job as executive chairman in each case is to help them succeed, to look down the pike in the road and do some of the visioning, but help them as the CEO. And it's that balance. So the other thing I would just mention is I didn't get here from day one, right? When I was early on, I was, founder and CEO or founder and chairman of a company and just getting that successful, whether it was my first one in college, Students for Exploration and Development of Space, or then International Space University. I wasn't doing multiple things in parallel in the beginning, but once you've earned the right, you can then paralyze, not the right word, go in parallel on multiple opportunities. Exponential Organizations is a book. The idea of an EXO was really Salim's, and then I developed it with him and co-authored this second book, Exponential Organizations 2.0. And it's the notion that there's a new generation of companies. These companies are not like the companies of 30 or 40 years ago. They are operating in a very digitized, dematerialized, demonetized, democratized situation. And they're operating, 10 times more effectively than the traditional companies. And so the book EXO 2.0 really looks at the attributes of these companies. One thing is that every one of these exponential organizations has an MTP. They're agile, they're using AI algorithms wherever they can. They're building communities and crowds. They're using dashboards. There's an MTP plus 5 internal and 5 external attributes that characterize these EXOs. And in the book, we lay out examples and what you can and should do to either build an EXO from the beginning, which is the easiest way to do it, an experimentalist, data-driven company, or if you have a large company already, it's much harder to retrofit it into an EXO. Your job instead is keep running your company, which is hopefully profitable, and then begin an EXO on the edge that is really born of a new type of DNA, a moonshot type of DNA.
Right. Well, I know we are coming up on time, so I think we will have to wrap up there. But I really appreciate you taking the time and want to respect it and wrap up ahead of the hour. But thank you so much again for coming on. I'm really grateful for everything that you're doing, and can't wait to see what's ahead from the XPRIZE on longevity and health span to whatever else you have in store. I'm sure there's a ton of it. So thank you for coming on, and great speaking with you.
My pleasure. And folks who want to follow the work, if you go to diamandis.com, I put out 2 blogs a week there. The stuff that I do in longevity, if you go to diamandis.com/longevity, I have a book called Peter's Longevity Practices that you can get for free. And it lays out everything I've ever learned, exactly what I'm doing in each area. And then check out, moonshotplanner.com and build your MTP and your moonshot. It's the thing that's given me the greatest joy in life is going after those and hitting them, or just the journey of going after them is fulfilling in itself. Right, Jake, thanks so much.